welcoming Mr. Dominic Gaskin, Hans Gaskin, to Room 592. Mr. Gaskin, you have certainly made the news on a number of times because you stood up and you spoke out for what you believed in, sir. And let me applaud you for doing that. And I would like to start the ball rolling. Bowl the first ball at you. What's Mr. Dominic Gaskin's perspective of politics as of today, the 14th of August, 2020, sir?
And I'm assuming that you mean politics in Guyana.
Politics in Guyana.
Well, I can't say I have a complete perspective, but basically my perspective on the political situation that took place this year, I'm very glad that it's over, that it has been resolved in a way that would appear to be acceptable to as many Guyanese as possible. I am disappointed that it took the course that it did. I believe that it has set us back in terms of our democracy, in terms of the way the rest of the world sees us. It has set us back maybe a decade or two. I'm very disappointed that the various powers that be allowed it to be so prolonged and to really create the kind of uncertainty that it did, both at home and abroad. I think it was a pretty bad year for Guyana, and it has certainly stained us unnecessarily. That said, like I said, I am happy that it has been resolved. I think we as a people will, get beyond this. We have a country to develop. There's a lot of good news, and I think sometimes we can get bogged down with the bad news. The good news is that we still have oil. We still have gold. We still have bauxite. We're still producing rice. We have an economy that is resilient, that is going to grow this year, unlike many of our Caribbean sister nations, and unlike many countries in the world, to be honest. So, there's a lot to look forward to. And as a Guyanese, I want to wish the new government lots of luck. They'll need it. And wish them all the best in managing the country and its resources over the next 5 years.
Mr. Gaskin, you were a former business minister of business. In terms of our growth, the President Ali mentioned over 58% projected growth, and maybe not right now, but in the near future. Putting on your Minister of Business cap that you would have had sometime, do you see that kind of growth as a reality within the next 2 years, sir?
Well, I think the projection is basically sound. GDP growth for 2020 to be in the vicinity of around 50%, down from the earlier projected 80-something%. So that is the reality, and is largely going to be due to the oil production. That's right. And the revenues and the money earned from oil exports. Also, we can't ignore the fact that gold prices are at an all-time high, and we're still producing fairly large amount of gold. That is going to also add to this year's GDP or GDP growth. So I'm not disputing his projections at all. Of course, come next year, once you have a 50-something% economic growth in GDP growth in 1 year, it's highly unlikely that you will sustain that level of growth. So it's going to go back down to something. Hopefully, it's going to go back down to something that's more sustainable in the long term. And I would like to think that could be realistically about 5%, maybe 6% growth per annum over the following 5 years. And that would be actually excellent for Guyana.
Right. Now, a question for you, sir. Remember the status or the state of sugar, the sugar industry. And the PPP government has signaled an intention to invest. Whatever they're going to do will require investment in sugar to get it back going. Would Mr. Gaskin agree that sugar be a priority, or should they really do an assessment before investing the oil money into sugar?
I think it's almost suicidal to invest oil revenues in sugar. Having said that, when I say invest, I think the estates that are currently operational require large amounts of capital investment, and I think that should be done by this government.
Right.
In terms of reopening the closed estates and investing money in reopening those estates, I think that would be suicidal. Or let me put it a little mild. I think it would be a bad idea. Okay. It won't be value for money. There are other things that we can invest in. Many other things.
Got you. Sir, I want to come right down to politics. You did, in your closing paragraph of your two earlier epistles, your messages, you made some recommendations to the AFC, of which you would have been part and parcel of. What's your thoughts of AFC today? Do you think that the AFC can survive what missteps it may have entered into for the 5 months?
I think it can survive. I think it is up to the current leadership of the AFC to ensure that the party survives. That, of course, will require a completely different posture from what I'm currently seeing, or from what the party has been, or the way the party has positioned itself over the last few months. The truth is, and I think we all know, that the AFC is a small party. It has a small support base, but small yet substantial. It was enough, we had enough electoral support to win 7 seats independently in 2011. We got 35,000 votes. We had enough votes to actually join or form a coalition with the APNU and win an election in 2015. Now, we can argue about the numbers that the AFC brought to the table in the 2020 elections, but the mere fact that the coalition won 217,000 votes in 2020, up from 205,000 votes in 2015, is an indication that the AFC did bring some value to the coalition, because I don't think that the APNU alone could have won 217,000 votes. But like I said, various people will give you different estimates of what the AFC would have brought to the table. But the bottom line is that the votes or the support base of the AFC is different from the support base of the APNU or the PNC.
Okay.
And that is something that we have to recognize, that the AFC needs to recognize if it wants to survive. In other words, it needs to appeal to its traditional support base, the support base that got it to where it was in 2015. And that is not the same as the APNU's support base. And I believe that the AFC has tried a little too hard to appeal to the APNU supporters rather than to focus on its own constituents, the people who made the AFC what it is or what it was. And if it goes back to that support base with maybe fresh ideas, maybe even some fresh faces, and some commitments, I think it can regain its critical position and critical role that it played in Guyana's politics over the last decade or so.
Right. Are you still a member of the AFC, sir?
I am a member. I am not an active member currently, or not very active.
Okay. And one, let me ask you this. Did you talk to Dad recently? Or what do you call Mr. Gray, President Gray? Do you call him Dad, father, father-in-law? Have you spoken? How is he doing, sir?
I haven't had a conversation with him recently, but we've always had a good relationship, a cordial relationship, and I would assume that relationship will continue. I think family ties transcend short-term political differences. But I don't want to focus on that. I think that is not really relevant to Guyana's politics.
Let me ask you this. A few persons have expressed an opinion that Mr. Dominic Gaskin spoke out because of the threat of sanctions and that because you are a dual citizen. What's your comment to that, sir? As you know, you can't please everybody, right? So people are going to come at you.
That's nonsense. I mean, I'm not worried if somebody wants to believe that. That's fine. To be honest with you, I didn't think the threats of sanctions and individual visa revocations and all of that, I thought it was a bluff, to be honest with you. So I never took it very seriously because I know I've never really seen sanctions such as those applied so early in the game. So I was quite surprised when they actually went ahead and did it. But my saying what I have to say has nothing to do with my citizenship. It has nothing to do with sanctions. It has nothing to do with foreign countries and the pressures that they're exerting. I say what I have to say because it's what I believe.
You certainly had a vision for the AFC and you wanted to ensure you were able to align your thoughts there, you would think?
Well, I liked the AFC. That's why I joined the AFC. I liked what the AFC had to offer. I thought the AFC could have been, and in fact, the AFC did or was the balance of power for a short period of time. And I think the AFC, the next logical step was to get into government, which the AFC successfully achieved. I think the circumstances under which the AFC came into government, or not came into government, but was forced to govern, that is as part of a coalition, a pre-election coalition, where we were actually on the same list as the APNU, as opposed to a totally independent coalition partner, made it a bit of a challenge. And I think the AFC, during its term in office, as a coalition partner, in retrospect, may have placed too much emphasis on maintaining the coalition, probably to the detriment of the AFC as a party, an independent party. Mm-hmm. I think it was important that the coalition be maintained for at least one term, because I think coalition politics could be the future of our country. And I therefore, me personally, I was very interested in ensuring and seeing the coalition work and survive the first term. But I know that in doing so, the AFC would have lost some support because it might have been felt by some of our supporters that we were perhaps bending over backwards to appease our coalition partners. And some might even have felt that, oh, y'all get into power and, that's it. You're no longer interested in the party. But I think there were sound reasons for wanting the coalition to survive. Having said that, the position taken by the AFC post March 2nd, I feel was not the right position for a party such as the AFC. I certainly was not happy and did not want to be associated with the position taken by the AFC after the Mingo Declaration. And well, the rest is history. You know my position on that.
Correct. Leonard?
Yes, thank you very much, dear sir. What would you say to the public perception that the AFC might have been complicit, fully in bed with the APNU, with an attempt to rig this election? Would it be a fair assessment of the people of Guyana, or at least a part of Guyana?
Well, I don't believe that to be the case. And I also don't believe that the AFC or APNU as political organizations or parties attempted to rig the election. I believe there was an attempt to rig the election. I do believe that it may have involved individuals associated with or part of one or both AFC and the APNU. But certainly this was not something that was sanctioned by the parties, and I don't believe that. So that would be my response. Of course, people will believe what they want to believe, and I don't think that the AFC did itself any favors after that attempt to rig the elections took place by either ignoring the attempt or denying it or actually trying to be the beneficiaries of what was a clearly blatant attempt to falsify the results of the election.
Thank you, sir. And were you ever? Do you have any indications whether the Alliance for Change might be asking you to go to Parliament? I think there's about 10 seats, according to Comrade Ramsden Leader, that might be in play. Would you be interested, or do you have any indications, sir, whether they'd be asking you to go with them?
No, that won't happen. I'm not on the list of candidates, so there's no way I'm going to Parliament. And I'm not qualified to sit in Parliament based on the Chief Justice's interpretation of the Constitution provision on dual citizenship, which she rendered last year. So no, I have no intention of going to Parliament. I'm not on the list of candidates.
And back to the elections, there's this whole big issue with the statement of polls, and which I think the opposition would have said, based on what they have in their possession, they know that they have won. Did you ever had a look at the statement of polls that would have been out there that maybe was in the coalition's possession?
I worked on election day or election night in my area, and we did collect statements of polls. We were not the custodians of those statements of polls. APNU took control of the statements of polls. But we did do a tabulation. We did have a tabulation exercise where we would have photographed the statements of poll that we collected, and those were then sent to a central, to a center that where persons were engaged in recording those in a spreadsheet and doing a tabulation. So I had access to those tabulations that we did.
And your conclusions from them, did it, based on what your party would have had, what you would have had in your possession, or what you would have seen, was there a conclusion that that the coalition would have won?
No, not based on what I saw. Based on all the information that I had, because unfortunately, my spreadsheet was not complete. But based on the information available to me, it would have been very difficult for us to have won the election. And certainly it would have been almost impossible for Mr. Mingo's numbers to have been accurate. And furthermore, if I can add, a lot of the information available at the time that I had access to correlated with the PPP's statements of poll that they had made public.
Right. Mr. Gaskin, the country will, of course, remember that it was no other than senior executives of the AFC that stood up and said that based on the statement of polls they saw, they have won. I mean, I remember David Patterson saying so. I remember Kemal Ramjatan not necessarily talking about the statement of polls, but saying we have won. These men would have seen the same statement of polls you would have seen, I presume. That aside, I mean, we can relitigate that over and over and over, but that aside, the problem I think that the AFC has is one of trust, where the population can now question whether it would trust AFC leadership anymore. The AFC going forward then, if you were to remain a member, should the executives probably be relieved of their positions? That's one. And two, if the AFC remains in the coalition, is there not a danger of being submerged, subsumed, and being dissolved?
Well, I think I to answer your last question first, yes. And maybe not even deliberately, it is just something that will inevitably happen to a smaller party in coalition with a larger entity, and perhaps exacerbated by what has occurred recently and the loss perhaps of a significant portion of its own support base. Mm-hmm. So yes, I do think that there's a danger of that happening. Unfortunately, the AFC doesn't have much of a choice where that is concerned, because it contested the election on the same list of candidates, and therefore it is bound more or less to the coalition, at least for the duration of the 12th Parliament. Now, that does not mean that it has to necessarily follow whatever the APNU proposes, or doesn't necessarily mean that it can't, that it has to vote with whatever the APNU decides to vote on. How they work that out between them, I'm not sure how that will happen, but you know, I think political parties in coalitions need to have constant dialogue and need to thrash out these things. Mm-hmm. In terms of your earlier question about the credibility or the loss of credibility, that's something that I think you would have to ask the individual members themselves. Maybe they have their own explanations for taking the positions that they took. I can only explain the position that I took. I don't want to sit in and judge anyone. Politics is politics. People take positions. Personally, I think that the position taken by the AFC post March 2nd was strategically unsound for a party like the AFC, because I think it's a position that did not go down well with the support base of the AFC. Right. And therefore, it leaves the AFC in a bit of a bind right now, because who or what is the support base of the AFC? It has to now regain the trust of its supporters and rebuild the party. And I would recommend a few fresh faces in the mix, certainly. But I don't want to go out knocking the leadership of the AFC, because I want to say this. What the AFC achieved and what Mr. Ramjatan and Mr. Trotman created is almost unprecedented around the world, and certainly in our neck of the woods. It was a bold move. It was a successful move, and I think it shows a good understanding of the local political scene by both gentlemen. I'm forgetting Ms. Sheila Holder. I apologize. But Ms. Sheila Holder was the third leader of the party and the founding member, and she also brought a lot to bear in terms of the strategic direction that the AFC took in its initial years. And I don't want to just flush all of that down the toilet, so to speak. I think it bears mentioning right now. So I would be the last person to know, on the basis of what I consider perhaps poor judgment on the part of the leadership of the AFC, to want to write them off or condemn them, because I still have a tremendous respect for the leadership of the AFC. I just don't, I disagree strongly with the position they took on the matter that we're discussing, or on elections, recent elections. But certainly I don't want to use that as a basis for writing them off politically in any way. But I think the AFC could benefit from fresh faces, at least in the public image of the AFC, and perhaps the leadership can do some work in the background to really build the party, because I know they have the skills and the ability to do that.
Right. Correct. Leonard?
Yes, thank you very much, dear sir. Where does this leave? Do you believe this is the end of the road, sir, for Mr. Moses Nagamutu, somebody who's been around decades?
I am not sure. I don't know. I have no idea what Mr. Nagamutu's plans are. So I can't answer your question. I honestly have no thoughts on that.
And to come back to when you would have made some conclusions based on the evidence that you would have had from the statement of polls, when you would have showed those, did you, my first question, sir, did you show that to your colleagues within the AFC?
My colleagues would have had access to the same information that I had. Whether they would have given it the attention that I gave to it is a different matter. But certainly, before I went public with my first statement or Facebook post, I did bring to the attention of the leadership of the Alliance for Change that I am not comfortable with the position that the AFC has taken, and further that I will not support such a position if that position remains.
And what was the response to that?
Mixed response, but suffice to say that by the end of a week, of the week following my bringing this to the attention of the leadership, I didn't detect any intention to revisit the position taken by the party. I didn't think that I was being I didn't think that my position was going to prevail, put it that way.
Mm-hmm. And I want to bring you to another something that has been bothering me personally. I'm not sure about you, but I'm sure that this is something that's been bothering a lot of Guyanese people. Sir, the damage, the ethnic lines, the ethnic message, the divisive messages that were out there. In your opinion, in your assessment, how much damage has been done to our people, to the psyche of the people?
It's very hard to assess because we are also a very forgiving and live and let live people. I think a lot of persons said things which I'm sure they may regret. But when I say a lot of persons, are they really? These are not this is not a majority. A lot of the very nasty, insightful Facebook posts, because most of it was on Facebook or on other chats. So when cumulatively, what do they amount to, as a percentage of our population? It's a small but very vocal section of the population that is really engaged in this ethnically divisive commentary and behavior. A lot of people who I speak to have their political views. Their political views may even be race-based, but they certainly do not carry any sort of what's the word I'm looking for? I mean, I don't detect that they are anti the other race. I don't believe that they have been affected by the outpouring of nastiness on social media. And so I think a lot of people are disappointed, but in terms of their personal attitudes towards other races, I don't think that what we are seeing out there is a reflection of the way most Guyanese feel.
Right.
I see people going about their business, laughing, joking, and doing their thing, regardless of how they feel politically or where their political loyalties lie. I'm seeing a lot of that. So I would want to believe that the ethnic divide is more of a political divide, or it's exacerbated by political tensions, and that when those political tensions are resolved or recede, then we go about, our business as usual and do what we have to do. And I sincerely hope that I'm right in feeling that way.
And
Leonard, let me just
sure.
add to your question there, Leonard. If we can just expand that a little bit more, because there is no talk of an economic resistance where persons are talking about boycotting certain types of businesses and certain types of business persons. I mean, as a businessman, both you and everybody else would know that will take us all nowhere. But what's your response to this political call for economic resistance?
I haven't heard that call from the political parties. I've seen it in various comments on social media, but I haven't heard any political party take that position. And I would want to believe that this is something that is being instigated or incited by a small handful of people who have their own, I guess, agenda, political views, or whatever we want to call it. I think it's misguided to a certain extent. We're all Guyanese, and when we start declaring economic war on each other, it's not likely to be in the best interest of the country as a whole. I think what we want is a competitive economy. To be fair, let's not also ignore the elephant in the room, which is that there is a fair amount of let's say, discrimination existing within our economy. People do tend to hire their own. People do tend to support their own. So that does exist. And we can't ignore it. I don't have the solutions for those who feel that perhaps the economy is requires some sort of rebalancing, that too much economic resources are in the hands of one ethnicity. these are discussions that I think are valid and should be had.
Right.
Like I said, I don't think the solution lies in boycott this person or boycott this store or boycott this ethnicity. I don't think that will that's a
Right.
solution. But certainly, in terms of how do we share the wealth of this country in a way that makes us all a little more comfortable, how do we ensure that no one segment of the population, whether it's by ethnicity or geographically or even by gender, is marginalized, you know, in our economy. I think those are all discussions that we should be mature enough to have.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, all the people who are advocating for certain types of measures or who are instigating certain types of economic behavior, I think should be part of that discussion. And, you know, it bears further examination. I think the state also has a responsibility to ensure that the pie is not gobbled up by any one segment of our population. So there's a lot to be said for the conversation itself taking place, but I don't think that based on the elections, and if this is a reaction to what took place between March 2nd and now, I think it's very unfortunate and I think it's misguided. Because I don't see the issue being one of race or ethnicity. I believe there was an attempt to commit a fraud, and we should all acknowledge it. If you don't want to acknowledge it at this point, at least it should be investigated by GCOM. GCOM, I think, owes the country an explanation about what happened and how Mr. Mingo was able to make declarations that bore no resemblance to the actual results on the statements of poll. And there must be some legal action taken to ensure that if there is culpability, especially if it was deliberate,
Right.
that the consequences are borne by those who participated in that. So I don't think it's an ethnic issue. If they acted on the basis of ethnicity, that's their problem. Whatever they did, if it was illegal and if it is found to be illegal, they should be dealt with by the law. And we as a people should not be defending what they did simply because of their ethnicity. And I don't think that too many people are actually going to defend them when they find out that there was a deliberate attempt to rig the elections.
Yes,
Bernard?
yes. Thank you very much, dear sir. I want to bring you to two questions I have here, sir. You are the president's son-in-law, and in addition to that, you were a former business minister. So I want to ask you, sir, how much of a pressure was this to you that you were the lone, probably at times, the lone dissenting voice in the party and maybe in the coalition? How much of a pressure did you face from this?
I wouldn't say I faced any pressure. I did think twice before I went public with my position, but I said what I had to say, and I really don't. Sorry, am I still on?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, you are. Go ahead.
Okay, because I'm not seeing you. My screen seems to have changed. Yeah. So no, I didn't feel any pressure, but I was cognizant of the fact that yes, I am connected to the party, and it does give it makes for an interesting story,
Mm-hmm.
and it could be exploited also. It could be taken out of context. Yes, but sometimes if you if you want to do the right thing or you want to say the right thing, you just go ahead and do it. And, you know, whatever the consequences are, so be it.
Yes.
Right.
Thank you very much for that. And Sir Christopher Jones, after March the 2nd, on the end of the month, at the end of the month of March, he was the sports director. A contract was signed according to what was reported in the media. Mr. Harmon appointed to the COVID-19 task force as the CEO of the Secretariat. What are your thoughts about this whole debate that's raging right now about political appointments, and the numbers, and creating a parallel public service structure there?
I think every government will have political appointees. I myself, as minister, was a political appointee, and I'm sure that my subsequent appointment as director of business can be deemed a political appointment. The issue with political appointments is that they should come to an end when the term of office of that government comes to an end. And that person should either resign, depending on how sensitive the position is, and certainly they should not be given long-term appointments. And certainly in an election year, I'm not in favor of long-term appointments for political appointees. If you just come into office and you're making a few political appointees, which could include ambassadors, which could include a number of positions, a 3-year contract, I don't have a problem with. But certainly, just before an election or just after an election, while there's a contentious election being in the process of being resolved, for long-term appointments, I don't think that is wise. I don't think it's a good idea.
Yog?
Yes.
I would like to add to that, though, that there are political appointments that are normal for any government. There are other political appointments that are an abuse of government's powers. In other words, taking persons and making them heads of agencies or heads of government departments without a competitive process, without attempting to get the best fit for the job. I believe that is an abuse, especially where those positions require technical expertise or require management skills. To just take politically loyal party members and plug them into those positions, I believe is an abuse of government power. It probably won't go away. I am hoping that over the years, with every change of government, we'll have less and less of those appointments.
Right.
He did it. The coalition did it to a certain extent. I'm not going to argue which was worse, but it has been a practice in Guyana for many decades now. And I think it's a practice that should be certainly reduced and kept to a minimum.
Yeah, I mean, it is obvious that first tranche would be loyalists, second tranche might be the cheerleaders, and fourth or fifth or sixth or 10th tranche might be professionals. It's political season. We all know what happens. But, sir, there has been some unfortunate revelations. And, I'm not saying any of the political parties are angels, but there would have been some revelations that there are persons who were appointed double down, triple down, quadruple down in some cases, where they have 4 or 5 different portfolio from various ministries and so forth. And I think what has happened, it would have really dented people's perspectives of this whole thing that you guys came into office with, that is the good life. And people are now saying it seems like it was a good life for some. My main question to you then, would Mr. Dominic Gaskin, as of today, tell political appointees of APNU AFC just pack up and go? Should they expect any rewards from the state if their contract was renewed post March 2020?
It really depends. I mean, in principle, perhaps I would say I would agree with you, but it does depend on the circumstances. For instance, um, let's say the COVID situation was an emergency that required a response. If appointments were made to a COVID task force or something like that of that nature, and those were made after March 2nd, you know, that's a bit different to an extension or a renewal of a contract for 3 years after March 2nd. I mean, we had a situation where certain persons whose contract expired earlier this year or late last year were put on a month-to-month or working on a month-to-month basis. And I think that's perfectly in order.
Yeah.
And I think those persons can either resign if they choose to, or if the incoming government asks them to resign, then they should resign. It could be that some of them have performed creditably and the government coming in will have no reason to dismiss them. So it all depends on performance. If they have been performing, it would be rather petty for a government to come in and just get rid of them.
But
if they're not performing and are just purely political appointees, then they should resign when the government loses the election.
Let's take it a step further in terms of your assessment, having been in government yourself, sir. Now, there would be cases where persons are political appointees. How does a politician then tread that fine line between, okay, let me let Dominic Gaskin go because he was on the political trail, he was campaigning, versus how do you view, for example, Yulita Moore is an employee of the Ministry of Health, but was a prominent name in an elections case that was deemed by everybody to have just prolonged an election declaration. How would a Hans Gaskin, if you were the current government of Guyana, view a Yulita Moore, for example?
Well, without going into the personalities, if you're a public servant and you're on the pensionable establishment, you're a public servant, and you want to, I don't know that the public service rules preclude political activity. I don't know the extent to which they do. But I think public servants, like any other Guyanese, have a right to engage in political activity. And therefore, a public servant who is hired as a public servant by the Public Service Commission should not be victimized for expressing their political opinion as long as they operate professionally in the capacity in which they are hired. The contracted employees, I think, are different.
Right.
And their contracts should be honored if those contracts were entered into in good faith, which is not always easy to establish. I admit that. But some things, I guess, are glaringly obvious. Some appointments. Look, when we came into office in 2015, we met a number of contracted employees whose contracts had just been renewed for 3 years. Right. There were quite a few of them. So this is something that is not peculiar to our government. It seems to be something that is done, and I'm sure there are other countries where the same thing happens.
Right.
I don't have all the solutions, but
the overriding question I have for you then is, and I'm going to wrap up. We're going to wrap up in a couple of minutes just now. But my overriding question for you, if you have Leonard Gildari as your employee and you are a manager of a business and he's working with you, and he takes certain actions, you would have to question, as a manager, you would have to question whether you can trust Leonard to serve your vision. Isn't that the bottom line at the end of the day?
Yes, and that's why I said the performance, depend if the employee is performing the functions that he or she has been hired to perform, then we have no problem. If the extracurricular activities of the employee are affecting their performance at work, then we have a problem. And if the employee is, because of his or her political persuasion, deliberately undermining the work of the entity, be it government or private company, then again, we have a problem. So I think a lot of it has to be, these things are can be delicate. There's no one hard and fast rule that we can apply. I think it does require a certain amount of discretion, and I hope that the new government has that discretion, has the ability to separate, different circumstances and different types of behavior, and not just want to paint everyone with the same brush. But we'll have to wait and find out. I think interfering with people's livelihoods is not something that we should take lightly.
And you said it, you said it well. At the end of the day, performance has to be the watchword. And, especially one would think that when you move, you were a minister. When you move and you go into a job, taking over a ministry, you would put your vision out there and you would tell people, look, I need your loyalty, I need your support and everything else. And then you evaluate the performance therefrom, isn't it?
Yes, and generally, I think people throughout the public service are prepared to support the government of the day. I have not found any, during my time in office, I haven't encountered any employees who were deliberately trying to undermine the work of the government, regardless of where their political loyalties lay. I don't ask people which party they vote for, which party they like. I don't never involved politics in the work of the ministry. And I had no problems or issues with staff, or whether they're heads of departments, senior staff, junior staff, in terms of political loyalty, or in terms of any sort of deliberate undermining of the work of the ministry because of their political views. I never encountered that as a problem. Or maybe it happened and I just didn't notice it.
Right. Thank you. Mr. Gaskin, my last question for you. Under the APNO AFC government, Ayub Mahadeo had applied a moniker to the whole state media. I call the Guyana Chronicle the Guyana Rag. And I stand by those words, and I believe it is still the rag. My personal position has been that government would tend to, by nature, abuse state media. What is Dominic Gaskin's position on state media, and especially NCN Chronicle going forward, sir?
I think it is possible for government to own media houses, whether it's the Chronicle or whether it's NCN, and allow them to operate independently within general guidelines. I think it's entirely possible. I also think it's desirable. I think it's utterly foolish for any government to create what you would call a rag. It doesn't serve the purpose that it was intended for.
Right.
I don't read the Chronicle. I didn't read it prior to 2015. I started reading it, in government, and then I stopped reading it after a while. Unfortunately, it's unfortunate I have to say this, but the bottom line is that if you're a government and you have ownership or responsibility for state media, I think it behoves you to ensure that those media houses become credible entities, credible media operations. And then you can use it for, you'll be more successful in what you're trying to achieve if you work on building credibility of the state media. And then perhaps you can inject a little bit of your own, when it comes election time, you can take advantage of your incumbency to get your message out in a way that is a little more advantageous to you than the opposition. And that would happen in any instance. But when you destroy the credibility of the state media, that's just poor political skills. It's poor strategy. It makes no sense because people look at the Chronicle and automatically, and there are other newspapers too that you can say the same thing for. Huh? I'm not singling out the Chronicle, but it's state-owned, and that's why we're having this discussion.
Yes. Well, Mr. Gaskin, thank you for that, sir. And I know Leonard wants to ask you a final one. Leonard?
Yes, thank you, sir. It's been rather engaging. I like your forthrightness and your honesty. I want to ask you, sir, if this is the end of the political road for Hans Dominic Gaskin, what is it? If the government of the day, the People's Progressive Party Civic, asks you to serve, would you be willing?
No, I'm not interested in a political future. I don't want to get involved in party politics anymore. I believe, made my contribution to a party that I liked. I have been very fortunate in being given the opportunity to serve at the highest levels within the party and within the government as a result of my involvement in politics. And I'm grateful for that. But at this point, I think I would like to take a break from party politics. I don't want to be an MP or a minister again. If I can contribute in any other way to anything that is positive and developmental for Guyana, certainly, but I'm not interested in becoming, getting involved in party politics anymore.
Right. Maybe we could add in the word "not at this stage."
They say never, so.
That's right. Because we still have to look at the reason you joined it was Guyana, not Hans Gaskin, but Guyana, and so the Guyana will always remain. Mr. Gaskin, it's been a pleasure to have you in Room 592, sir. We know that we have thrown some bouncers and so forth at you, but I must say, all respect to you, irrespective of how we have pushed you and asked you questions, you have been very forthright and very honest, and I think. I'm going to throw this last little curveball at you. You really speak to the banner that the entire coalition campaign on. That is honesty and integrity, and I'm proud of you standing up for that, sir. And on behalf of the viewers and listeners, our thanks. We appreciate you being here, Mr. Gaskin, and we look forward to future engagements.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, and a pleasant good night to all your viewers. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure to have you all in Room 592. We look forward to your company on Monday evening again, when we will be joined by the Attorney General, Mr. Anil Nandalal, in Room 592. And at 7:30 sharp on Monday, we'll have a little brief look at the economy from one of our local economists, a little preview before Mr. Nandalal joins us. So Monday night looks to be very interesting. Leonard, what's the plan for the weekend?
Well, the weekend is that I have work and more work. I'm going to be off a couple of days next week. I have to, but we are always here. And of course, Mr. Gaskin and you guys are always going to be there. So that's a good thing. And that's me being the diplomat.
Good. Well, thanks to the boys. Thanks to the team at Kaiser Radio, the technical team, Raj, Kevin, Joshua, and everybody there. Leonard, thanks to you, Mr. Gaskin. Thank you. Do have a great night. And to your family from Room 592, our respect and regards to them all. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure to have you here. Remember, wherever you've been joining us from, do say a prayer for this beautiful country of ours. It is still the best place on this planet. God be with you. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye now.